Amy, if you can start to put the slides up, I want to welcome everybody. And of course, the strange thing is that many of you know one another so much better than I know you. My name is Pat Bullen. I'm a contact associate. I do quite a few other things. I still work in the East and West Midlands as the SEN network coordinator for the local authorities there. So I've got a local authority background. I trained to teach children aged 2 to 19 with severe learning difficulties originally. So I've been through a teaching and head teacher route. And probably the most important one that I've saved till last is that I got into this field like so many of us did because I had an older brother with additional needs, and he taught me a great deal, and he helped me to understand what inclusion was about, and I think what elements of co-production are too. So I know that you've had an inspection back in March of last year. That probably feels like centuries ago, and that one of the remarks that was made within the body of that report was that not enough is being done to seek out the views of those underrepresented in giving their voice. And it elaborates a bit further. And I know that one of the things that you've done, that you've taken action around, is to develop the pledges for co-production in Norfolk. So I think that today, particularly given the unusual period that we've all been living through, is an opportunity to, despite being all separate and in houses that have got boiler problems and no hot water, etc., and are getting a bit warmer, Tracy, it's for us to think about what co-production is and what does it mean to us in Norfolk, and how are we going to take those pledges even further and make them have a direct impact on the lives of families and young people in the county. So it's going to be a day where there's a session where there's a bit of information giving, and then I hope that you'll use the text box so that we can get some feedback from you along the way. And if that's all right with you, Amy, it would be great to move on to the next slide. And Amy's now trying to do a couple of jobs. She's admitting people and she's moving my slides on.
Oh, there we go. It's gone.
There we go. Okay, so just thinking about, definitions of co-production. My observation, and I'm lucky enough to work around a lot of places in England. I've been already, in inverted commas, in Yorkshire this morning in a different meeting before I came to join you. Just thinking about where we are in 2021. We've learned a lot from this COVID epidemic too, about things that we might want to keep and things that we could lose when we do start to return to a new normal, probably in the late spring, early summer, if we're lucky with the vaccination arrangements in our country. We're going to hear from Amy, who is one of the FLAIR, the national team of ambassadors, young people ambassadors who've got a lived experience, they've got additional needs of their own, and they've got very clear views about co-production and participation. We're going to just see a few examples of some of the things that we think work around the country that you might want to take into account. And we do then want to break into groups, so it won't all be a download of information. And these slides will be available if you find them of use after the event. It will then be an opportunity in smaller groups to life in all of the different roles that we have, because we've got really good representation from different agencies because of the power, I think, of Family Voice and their draw. We've got colleagues from children's social care, from adult social care, from our teams that support young offenders. We've got people from education. We may have fewer school leaders than we hope to because of the very recent developments for them and the challenge that they've needed to rise to this week. We've got colleagues from the SEND services within the local authority. We've got colleagues from health, and we've got a really good representation, of course, from our parent and carer group, the Family Voice. So the intended outcome, and this is one of a series of 4 workshops together, is that we will then move those pledges forward to perhaps develop principles, values, and possibly some of the actions that we think will refresh the future collaboration around co-production going forward, because co-production is like any relationship. It can start well. We've all got personal relationships, whether they're familial, friends, but if you don't tend to it and you don't sometimes take stock as well, then things can drift along. They don't always go as well as they could. So my invitation to you would be to think about perhaps considering some sort of annual activity where you think about co-production, and look at it in a dispassionate way, really. Try to look at what you think you're doing well and how you can take it forward as you build that relationship over time. And we know that the deeper relationships get, just like person-centered approaches, the more meaningful the actions are that we take together to make change happen. Okay, can we move on, please, Amy? So the first thing I would like you to do, really, because co-production is a word that particularly came into the consciousness of people like me from an education background with the 2014 Children and Families Act. But it's been around for many of you from a social care background, particularly, for a lot longer than that. But what does it mean to you? It would be great if you could just type any word that just comes into your head into the chat box so that we can have a look at them together and draw them out.
Sorry, can I just say, I've just had a notification come up on my laptop to say my laptop wants to do a restart. I don't know what that will cause. I've tried to delay it as much as I can, and I don't know why it's doing it, but if there's any problems, then I'll have to restart the meeting, I assume. Do I, Amy?
I'm not sure. Let's see what happens. Let's hope it doesn't happen.
Okay. I'll try to avoid it. I'm just putting that warning out there. Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks for letting us know, Kelly. And I can't see the chat box because I've got the slides up, so I'm not sure what's happened there. So I might now ask if you, Amy, could call out some of the words that we're seeing in the chat box, or if Tracy would like to from Family Voice, or Nicola.
I can't see it because I'm sharing the slides, so I don't know if anyone else can.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, Kelly,
yes,
that would be great.
Kelly,
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So Claire shared a link with me. People struggle to get in. Claire shared the link to the pledges.
Mm-hmm.
So people have been commenting, produced together, listening, working together, parents as colleagues, collaborating, teamwork, making things better, working together, equal say and power, equality of opportunity, inclusion, all stakeholders, hearing the voice of the child and understanding the family context, all stakeholders working together, meaningful, collaboration and support, equals, more collaboration, doing with, not doing to, being listened to, working together, mutually supportive collaboration, partnership, creating and developing partnership approach with those with lived experience, sharing views and ideas, everybody's responsibility, respectful, common goals, sustainable, and giving power to users and making sure that their lived experience frames services.
Well, I don't think we can disagree with any of those. They sound fabulous, don't they? So we've got that already, that knowledge amongst us that these are the elements, the essential ingredients of co-production. Could you use the chat box again? And I'm going to need to ask my very helpful colleague co-production in your area in Norfolk. So that could be something in your team. It could be something about the individual. So it could be individual service or strategic co-production. What works well in Norfolk? And don't be shy about what you think your strengths are, because if you don't tell anybody, there isn't going to be anybody else out there shouting from the rooftops about you.
So John says engaging with families and users at meaningful levels. Early years providers building close relationship with families and working effectively together to try and support transitions into schools, offering a balanced view from a cross-section of voices, trying lots of different methods to obtain views of children, young people and their families, VCSE, sector expertise in co-production, a commitment to ensuring co-production is part of our ways of working, good relationships with parents, carer organisations, having significant proportion of parent governors to shape policy development, being part of Family Voice, links with Norfolk Send partnership, working with families and professionals to support, Norfolk Autism Partnership and Learning Disability Partnership, Norfolk Portage Service. We work very closely with parents and families to achieve best outcomes for their children, working to achievable long-term goals using small steps approach, close relationship with the families, co-produced area SEND strategy, and since the inspection, co-producing our written statement of action, engaging with families in a way that works, systems in place to seek the voice of the child and young person, help you choose website development with views of young people as an integral part of the process, use of young person's voice in all NYOT assessments, reports and interventions, as well as using a specific service user group to gain the feedback and views. Engagement wider, missed that one, a commitment to true co-production and development of a positive, successful collaboration. Irene, the NICC producing training resources and contributing to practice and service development partnerships between LAC/CL stakeholders and involves wider consultation with the LAC/CL communities. That's where we're up to.
That's great, Kelly, thank you. And it seems to me that we probably could we probably could almost log some of these so that we map them, and particularly when there is a revisit from the inspectors, that there is some sort of ability then to demonstrate where we know we can find good practice. I was struck by early years and Portage probably in particular, because we so often seem to get it right in the early years. 110 areas have now been inspected in England, and 51% of those areas, obviously including Norfolk, have had a written statement of action. And it's really quite apparent to me that when I've read those areas that have a written statement and those without, because I have read all of the reports, it's something that is helpful with the work that I do. Almost uniquely, early years is a strength. Not early identification always, but early years and support. So there's an awful lot of evidence in the early part of family experiences about strong co-production and engagement. And for those of you who've got children who've been through a mainstream nursery PVI, as well as those of us who've got the experience of young children with additional needs, in those early years, there is that real sense of being a proper team to support and develop your child or young person, and that real knowledge that we're all beginning to observe what preferences are, that choices that a young child makes, the way that they're beginning to communicate and express themselves. All of those attributes that we identify in early years continue to be important as we all grow and prepare for adulthood, and yet we don't always maintain that sort of co-production. I think Ruth said something that can still be clunky in early years, and I'm happy to let you chip in, Ruth, if that's helpful, because I can't read all of the chat box.
Well, just that it's not perfect still, and I think that one of the things that's always a real struggle, particularly with our youngest children, is being able to still capture the voice, often with the very youngest ones. It's not all great there, but that relationship with families is very strong, and that's a good starting point for the co-production, I think, for the family's journey as well. And there's some services that they link really brilliantly with, like Portage and so on, and others that it's not always that smooth. So we know there's still work to be done and improvements that can be made. But I think that evaluation framework we're using now and just introducing does highlight this, so that we get to that point. Co-production is really at the centre around inclusion. So we won't see the benefit.
Ruth, we're just having a bit.
but there's more work that's being, I think.
Sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you. I think we're just coming in and out a bit. I'm looking at some of the people I can see. It's not only me, I think.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I've got so many children. They're all on doing their live teaching.
Right. Okay, well, I think we got the gist of what you're saying, and I'm not suggesting that I think it's perfect anywhere. There's always, in my experience, room for improvement, but I think I'm trying to make a case that we often seem to start with the right support, arrangement, partnership. We don't always continue that, and we particularly don't always begin to develop the mental capacity of our young people, because we know that they will need to be decision makers over time. And obviously we're speaking about young people with additional needs, 1.3 million young people across England, and they'll be as heterogeneous as everybody in our community. There'll be some who are really adept verbal communicators and others who are pre-verbal. And we've got to give voice to all of those young people in different ways. And I guess in early years, we use those observation skills as well as the direct communication from young people. Now, because co-production in many ways does start with that voice of the child and the young person, and because of our timings today, we're really fortunate that we have Amy from Flare who's joining with us, and we'd asked her to speak at about 10:30. So if I'm not beginning to cause her a problem, because I hope she may have just arrived with us in the room, I think we'll take my slides down, please, Amy, and we'll put them up instead. And I can see the chat box a bit now, which is nice too. And since I could last see it, there are 81 new messages. So we are a chatty bunch in Norfolk, I'm pleased to say, and we've got lots of ideas, which is just what we want for today's session. I would like to welcome Amy. If you haven't heard of the Flare, we go into some conversations in groups, which I think will be even more important because we want to capture what you think and what you feel today. Okay, so I'm just going to remind us of some things that seem to be common and commonly known, but sometimes we're so busy, we're caught up in the day-to-day, and we might move on and forget about them. But the code of practice, I've mentioned already in passing that I think much of the person-centered approaches, the ways of working in co-production have got a longer history in social care. Certainly me training as a teacher and becoming a head teacher, I don't feel there was the same. There was a bit of arm's length, working with parents in Headlamp, the qualification that I did that was a forerunner of the National Professional Qualification for Head Teachers. But this was the first piece of legislation that enshrined in law some of what co-production would be in the education sector. So the SEN Code of Practice in 2014 set out parent carer forums that they'd begun in lots of areas. They'd stemmed sometimes out of the old parent partnership services that we had before the changes that introduced IAS services. And they're described as representative local groups of parents and carers of children and young people with disabilities who work alongside, maybe might have like in partnership, but alongside local authorities, education, health and other service providers to ensure the services they plan, commission, deliver and monitor meet the needs of children and families. And as you know, there are regulations that sit alongside the Code of Practice, the SEND information regs, for example, that require local authorities to annually consult with parents and young people about the local offer. And there is also that same requirement placed on schools for the SEND information report. And there's a real variation across the piece about the way that happens in local areas. Okay, should we move on, Amy? And these slides that I'm currently using have been developed by NNPCF with Contact. So, where the Norfolk PCF family voice fits with the regional and the national network is this way. They're part of a much bigger family, and that means they get information from the national group, and they really do have at their fingertips a knowledge of what's going on nationally, but they also feed into it. It's a two-way process, though, the arrows point downwards. And we know that parents have been important voices in Send locally, and also that the parents like Sharon Hillman yesterday, I think earlier this week, have been reminding people on Twitter that we do need to hear what parents think about school closures or the opportunity for vulnerable children, children with additional needs, children who are children of key worker parents. What do they think about the requirement to be in school, or should it be flexible? Because it might need to be one size fits one. So parents have got a really powerful voice through the family of parent and carer forums, and the national network of PCFs have very recently hit that magical number of having over 100,000 members. So when that group are surveyed, they do speak for a very large amount of parents in the country. And at the local level, you know, the parent and carer community does share thoughts, concerns, and hopefully compliments with family voice. But the forum itself is about supporting local community understanding, you know, what is the lived experience, but also identifying and challenging the strategic needs to improve local delivery. You know, you said we did approach in particular. Okay, let's move on, Amy. So parent and carer forums, family voice don't do these things, and there's sometimes a misunderstanding within the parent community itself because they're not a support group. There might be some spin-offs. There is support in being with parents, I think, who've had a similar experience to you, who've had a, you know, walked a bit more in your shoes. There's an empathy that is sometimes unspoken. There's an ease at which that families can feel, but it's not a support group. A PCF is a strategic group that empowers local areas to co-produce and co-design more powerfully and with a better impact on the services for families in the local area. They're not a protest group. They're not advocates for individual cases. They can often signpost for the support required, and they're definitely not in a fight. And now I've met Family Voice, I wouldn't want to be in a fight with them because they're really knowledgeable and they would outgun me. So let's move on. And again, these slides might be familiar, but I'm just, you know, bringing us all, I think, to a hopefully a similar level. PCFs, Family Voice and others, they don't know everybody in the local area. I was struck by the inspection report from March of last year that was very clearly Ofsted and CQC saw a real strength in the forum in Norfolk. But they also recognised that some parents who didn't know about the forum and perhaps had a different view, they felt that their views on balance when they looked at the evidence were about the absence of knowledge for that small group of parents because they didn't seem to actually know what Family Voice did. So there perhaps is something about the way that we communicate and explain and also how we recruit, because it can be tricky to recruit parent and carer forum members, and sometimes the forum changes over time because obviously we tend to move through with our children. I know I was involved in preschool when my kids were little, and now I'm thinking more about, like a lot of you are, the post-18 scenario for young people. Parent and carer forums only talk about problems. In the water cooler moments, like practitioners too, we all do, but the aim is to be solution focused wherever possible. And to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, but we do want to work together so that we get those better outcomes for children and young people in Norfolk. And they don't always represent the whole community, but they're trained and supported to use collective experiences to inform and influence discussions. And I do know of one forum, Shropshire PAC Forum, where the PCF have been commissioned by the local authority to gather and capture information about the experiences of families whose children are at SEN support level, because there's an awareness that more families have joined the forum, whether young people or children have an EHC plan, but there's a real need to know what the experience is like for those who are on the SEN support graduated response. Okay, let's move on. So strategic and individual participation, we were using some of this language as well within Contact and NPCF. Let's see the difference with the next slide. So at the individual level, we know that parent and carers meet with practitioners. They tell their story repeatedly, as we know, with their individual experiences. They sometimes can capture that in wikis now or different approaches. So a wiki, if you know about it, is the RICS University Facebook, but it gives the ability to describe your preferred ways of communication, to give a bit of a potted history of what your young person you have experienced over time, and you can choose to share that then with a practitioner who started to work with you and your family. So some families have found that useful, but many of us are still working with paper and with technology as it stands in this guise. Individual parent carers responding to consultations. So we heard from Amy about that's still important. And there are times when as a family you just want information. You know, if school sports day is cancelled or postponed because of the weather, I don't need to be engaged in co-producing that. I just need the school to tell me. So there's a place for information, there is a place for consultation, but there is certainly an important strategic level that we'll go on to at the next slide. And parent and carers having their voice heard about their child and engaging with services that they use. So I know, for example, the Vision team, the old VI team in Leicester City, that they have vision ambassadors. They have young people who come together and, you know, are able to describe some of the barriers and the opportunities of having perhaps a visual impairment or need, or being registered blind, and how the city's facilities can be improved. So they're looking at citywide, not just a school-based approach, but equally their parents too are able, when their children are younger, to give information to that service about the way that they can develop the best support for home education, for example. And it's good to see from John that exists in Norfolk too, so that's good to hear. And families engaging in person-centred processes. So again, you know, Nason have a suite of 22 films about being involved in person-centred reviews. One of them, which really struck me, is the preparation of parents and carers to know what their role could be when they come to their first annual review, because it can be quite daunting. Okay, to move on, Amy. Strategic participation then is probably more of where we're thinking about today, but all of these fit together like a hand in a glove, because if we miss out some parts of the jigsaws that we saw on the presentation that Amy showed to us, they all fit together, and those pieces are important separately, but produce more of a holistic approach when they do offer all of those different opportunities in the Norfolk area. So at the strategic level, meeting with service leads for collective experiences. I know in Derbyshire that the deputy director there meets every 6 or 7 weeks. So it used to be a half term. We just have a coffee with members of the parent and carer forum there to say what's going on, how do people feel, what's working well, what's not working well in Derbyshire for families with SEND and inclusion. So it didn't need to be very formal, but if something significant came up, then it did need to be formal. But they got that access to a very senior leader, in addition to all of the other things that they sat on, all of the different work stream activities, the interviewing and recruitment processes for staff within SEND services. It's about the forums working with commissioners, because again, that local offer requirement, a duty that we don't see working very well across the country. NNPCF surveyed local offers 3 or 4 years ago and found that only 5 out of 152 would meet the needs and be compliant from the family's perspective. So the language wasn't always clear, the information might be confusing, there could be an absence. But the local offer was always intended to be not only a directory of services, but to identify gaps so that we were able to decommission and recommission the kind of support that families wanted. when we started to look at local offers in the Pathfinder era, and I was a Pathfinder lead at the time, the first 70 the first of 70 Google searches that we found was an autism-friendly barber or hairdresser. So what families have been Googling across the country is, where can I go to a barber's or a hairdresser's? I live in Ashby in Leicestershire, and on our high street now, when in normal times, once a month, the barber's shop that my son goes to opens only for young people with autism. That's because families have given that information, given that feedback to a local provider, and commissioners need that feedback just as much. And we need to be considerate about the way we capture that. We can capture plans, what are families telling us in annual reviews. That isn't always gathered as comprehensively, partly because of the systems that we use in local authorities, but you can also dip sample, you can take an opportunity to find some of those things out. We've got commissioners on this session today who I'm sure will have some brilliant ideas about how they work with families to develop and design services. Forums do shape and support the improvement to practices to provide improved parent participation, a bit as described really, or John did with the VI service in Norfolk. Co-producing person-centred processes to improve outcomes for families. Well, for me, what that means is something like a vocational profiling tool that might be used from year 9, so that we start to identify when we have annual reviews with young people about the things that they're interested in, so that we get the right work experiences, we plan for the right supported internship, and we begin to think about opportunities for different types of need. Some of our young people will need to have opportunities to be stimulated, to have community-led support activities when they reach adulthood. Others will be able to move forward to employment, and the parent forum can help us to identify what families need to know to access those. And influencing policy and strategic direction as part of the local area team. You are very much part of the team that is now looking at the written statement of action and is taking that action to get Norfolk into the place where you want it to be, where everybody shares the aspiration, but it's the how-to that can sometimes present the challenge. And families have just got often some of the best ideas to help us to find those solutions. A friend who lives in Coventry, when her son was in year 11, he couldn't access college or work experience very easily because he never travelled by public transport. There weren't many buses around, and he didn't have a need to take a bus to school. And when she did a little survey, because she's a really influential parent of this mainstream secondary school, in year 11, 84 parents said that their young people needed support with independent travel. So what that meant was they immediately started to develop independent travel training for all of those young people who are on the SEN support and EHC plan pathway within that school. But 84 in 1 year 11 was quite a surprise to me, and that's a mainstream provider. So families can give us that information and help us to develop our strategy and our implementation. Let's move on. Just a couple more from me. So what's the difference between participation and co-production? And participation is described as the process by which children, young people and their parents, carers influence decision making, which brings about change in them. We got that powerfully from Amy C, didn't we? That it was good for her to be heard, to develop her own personal skills. It brings about change in others, our services and communities that we offer. Okay, Amy? And Hope mentioned Tresida's degrees of participation. I quite like the ladder, but on the basis that you might want to use different methodologies. But the thing about ladders, of course, is it immediately makes us think about snakes. I like this because it looks more equal, and Tresida's very clear that there isn't a progressive hierarchy, you know, that it isn't better to do these things. There needs to be no limit to the involvement of children and young people and their parents, carers. but they'll not be able to engage in initiated by the family projects straight away. You know, we've got to build that empowerment. So I mentioned mental capacity. My experience of working in schools is that if children came into their annual review, and I was head of a 4 to 19 school, I've worked in that sort of age profile before headship too. They came in when they were 4 and just brought in some items that were important to them, objects of reference or toys that were really important to them, things that were interesting to them, pictures of things they did outside of school. Then they built that opportunity to get to the point where when they were in year 7, in my view, they needed to be very much central to the annual review process. And they were then using PowerPoint presentations to explain some of their achievements over the last year, but also their ambitions for the future. So if we build that, we build self-advocacy, and we build, I think, over time, the ability to develop decision-making mental capacity. And again, there are a lot of person-centered tools that to come to things about. Only a couple more slides now, honestly. So co-production, what's different to participation? And it is a bit hard to get hold of. You know, it's a bit, you have this vision, but bringing that vision down to earth and making it relevant, making those pledges that you got in Norfolk come to life at the individual service and strategic level. We're going to get onto that how-to, I hope. But co-production is not just a word, it's not just a concept. It's that meeting of minds to come together to find a shared solution. So these definitions come from practitioners and families and people with needs of their own coming together to advocate for this way of working. A way of working whereby citizens and decision makers or people who use services work together to create a decision or service which works for them. And probably just as importantly, the approach is value driven and built on the principle that those who use a service are best placed to help design it. So in Nottinghamshire, the first of the personal budgets that was allocated after the 2014 Act was to a family that had a 4-year-old with significant health needs as well as learning needs. And he was about to start at a special provision and required considerable support in transport from home to a special school because of his breathing and ventilation needs. And the cost of that transport came in at just under 100k when the authority looked to commission it. And they did sort of take a big gulp, because that meant on transport alone, they'd be spending over £1 million for the next 15 years. And they had a conversation with the family, and the family said to my colleague Chris in Notts, well, we've got 3 children. Mum would actually prefer to take our 4-year-old, the youngest, to school, and could do that if the other 2 had some childcare support and before, you know, breakfast club or before and after support in the school. And ultimately, they made a decision together that the authority would allocate a personal budget that picked up the cost of petrol and so on, but more significantly picked up 18k cost of childcare for the 2 other children. So there was a massive saving for the authority, but much more importantly, or as important, because it is important to use public money sensibly, the family felt that that was a better outcome for them, that the child that they felt was the most vulnerable was their youngest, was able to be in the care of his mum, and the other children then were well looked after, but didn't need to be with mum as much as the family felt the youngest child should be. So when we make decisions with our families, we often get from the value driven really good value as well. Families make great decisions when they know what's available, and we empower families to do so. So it's about that relationship where professionals and citizens share power. Let's move on. And I think Deborah's commenting. I can only see the headline when they come up, so I might call you in a moment. I think a lot of us know of TLAP. Those of us who are practitioners, think, local, act, personal. that came from some of the work that In Control have produced. And again, it's about developing equal partnerships. Now, these resonate with lots of the things that you said when we use the chat box to describe what co-production is: an agreed definition between everyone taking part, key principles around equality, diversity, access. I don't think we used the word reciprocity, and I'm glad we didn't, because I've had trouble with it there, but I think that that was the intention that we were getting at. And just another slide, I think. Just thinking about your pledge, we believe that co-production is the best, fairest and most effective way to achieve this. This was the prior bit was the SEND code of practice implementation. Children, young people and families must be placed at the centre of shaping the way services are planned and delivered. And when you describe what is co-production, it's where everyone works together on an equal basis. Now that's quite a big, a short sentence, but a big, or subclause, but a big statement to make, to create a service or come to a decision that works for them all. Okay, Amy? So we move on, because that was, oh, and I think I got confused. I thought we were going to move on to the onto the group work, but let me just quickly go through this. We've just got a couple of slides. Around the country, some of the practice that we've seen, you may be aware of genuine partnerships. Genuine partnerships came to them, and they developed initially inclusion indicators with schools, and they've taken that further now and have developed 4 cornerstones of co-production. And if you click on the link, you'll be able to find the way that they've tried to not just use the word co-production, but make it happen. So welcome and care. I mean, those standards are great for me. We all know, if you're from a schools background, that some schools are really welcoming, and some schools immediately make it apparent that, you know, I don't know whether we can meet need. And if you don't feel welcome, you won't feel confident that that's going to be the place that will value and include you. It does include, co-production does include good communication. And that's something that you might want to reflect on, or we might at a later workshop, and how we continue that working together in partnership. And all of those develop, of course, trust and build it significantly over time. So genuine partnerships just do some fabulous work, and I would really invite you to have a look at the inclusion indicators that they've developed. Okay, Amy? I've mentioned young people's participation in Richmond and Kingston, and I would particularly invite Maxine, and I'm happy to do an introduction for Maxine and any other colleague, to contact Grace Over, because they've just developed, because they've given that time, attention, dedicated resource, and also remunerated young people, but also developed that idea of, you know, the awards through Duke of Edinburgh supporting young people. It's a really comprehensive way of working and a real investment over time. We've seen FLAIR, and I've used them, as I've told you, to audit aspects of the EHC plans, which was really useful. In Lincolnshire, they started from a tricky place where they perhaps several years ago didn't have a good relationship as a local authority in CCG with the Parent and Carer Forum, and they had a weekend away, like an outdoor activity weekend, which was interesting, but it actually really did bond and develop the relationships and the links between that group. And it might not be everybody's thing, but they regularly now refresh, they come together to kind of look again at, you know, how are we doing, and to spend time together as practitioner officers, leaders, including the Chief Exec, and the Young People's Forum with the Parent and Carer Forum. In Dudley, if you commission any work about young people and find out something, so that we don't keep asking the same parents the same things and the young people the same things, they used to call it a repository, but thankfully they call it Chatterbox now. So if I'm a youth group or a Scouts leader in Dudley and I ask questions of young people, then it's in this one place. And if I'm conducting some research then for a service, it's all there in one place for me to find. That struck me as really powerful. In the East Midlands, where I live, we've recently trained, with the support of Hope and the team at CDC, young people to be reviewers. We have a send peer challenge process where we kind of mimic or model the local area inspection, and we've had parent reviewers from the outset, but we've just in February of last year trained young people to be reviewers, because again they can find things out and give perspectives, like Amy C did earlier, that is invaluable. The more common things that we see around are parent and carer forums, working with the LA and CCG as a strategic partner, planning a role within the written statement of action. And in one area in the Northwest that I've worked in, it's been really necessary for the local area, the local authority and the CCG to understand the busy nature of family lives, because they've sometimes not used that maximum of family friendly hours, which might be agreed at 10 till 2, so I can pick up and be around for the children, particularly my child with additional needs, in the right time. But those methodologies need to take into account the nature of families' lives. Interviewing and recruiting, I think we're perhaps more familiar with. And I do remember, well, every time I've worked with young people, but one issue came to mind then about interviewing for a principal educational psychologist many years ago. The young people just have got this, they've just got this ability to sniff out the best practice. All of the kids that I've worked with over the years as a teacher, and my own children, have always known who the best teachers were, and they weren't using an Ofsted scaling. So young people do know, they've just got this inbuilt detector. I won't use the other word that sometimes precedes it. And values-based approaches that can be agreed by all partners guiding the work. And I think that's where the pledges that you've got come in, and is linkage to SENDIAS. We've got that knowledge of a graduated response in the education experience of children and young people. We've got that early support and graduated response of social care support. I'm not seeing many areas come up with a depiction of what co-production looks like, from the SENDIAS, the parent and carer, family voice, the young people. And actually we could map that really easily. That might be one of the things you think we could do together. Let's move on, because we want to hear from you. There's been that sort of, setting the scene. There'll be a lot more activity over the next workshops, but we want to move into groups now, and it's the family voice, the Norfolk PCF, that will be facilitating these groups, and I'll be in one as well. And then we want to just come back and find what we've discovered in our group work. So we're thinking about co-production, we're thinking about how we bring that to life in Norfolk, and we're thinking about what already is happening, capture the appreciative inquiry, good stuff, and then we want to think further about the next steps. Okay, and Amy?
Button at the right time.
It's very difficult because so many people have such a lot to say about their work, and not everybody got to talk, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, the good news is we are going to all meet again, so we won't miss any of it. Hopefully we can pick it all up at
Can I see anybody who's back from my room? Oh yes, I can see some back now.
Whew. The magic of the plenary button, it's so much more powerful than asking people to come back to a room for the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, unfortunately Tracy needs to apologise to her room because she accidentally pressed the button to leave straight away when people were still talking. So when her room is back, Tracy just wants to say sorry.
I'm so sorry, folks. I was too overzealous with with my mouse, and I meant to just move it and press the red leave button. So I'm sorry, and I'm sorry that not everybody had a chance to have a word. It's incredibly hard when so many people have got so much to say. Hi G. Yeah, it's really difficult because everyone has some really fantastic things to talk about in their work. So
absolutely, that was the fascinating thing. So Tracy, given that you did partially at least facilitate a group, is there anything that you would capture from that group about co-production values and principles that we can feed into our work for the next session?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are doing something. the people that we spoke to. Some are doing loads of co-production. And rather than try and do everything at once, but build on that. And I must say I like the idea of coming back again in a year and seeing how the things that we've all decided upon have worked out or not worked out, and seeing what are the barriers that people have found with trying to make co-production work, because no doubt there are some barriers, and we need to work through those to get it working.
Thank you, Tracy. How about you, Nicola, with your group? I think you need to unmute.
Yeah, it was interesting. Everybody in our group felt that they were already engaged in co-production and that it was a key part of their practice. But some also recognised that to do it properly does involve an investment of time and some really serious consideration about priorities and how you put in what you need to put in to make this work, and that was an important factor to take into account. Also that not this is particularly true of engaging children and young people, and that to remember that not engaging them but making decisions for them and on their behalf, even with, you know, all the best will in the world, and as a parent I can quite accept this, is that doing that for them and not engaging with them is not a neutral act. It is actually depriving them of an ability to grow and learn and feel feel ownership of their own lives, and that's something we should always bear in mind.
Thank you, Nicola. Natasha, is it all right to come to you?
Better just unmute myself. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Sorry, not everyone in my group did get an opportunity to talk, but we took it at the stance of we were looking at how potentially we could improve co-production in terms of using, like Flair, using children and young people to help inform changes and developments. And what we found, or what we all shared, was that potentially the lack of participation groups at the moment. We have small pockets of them, but there aren't so many children and young people within those groups. And we sort of thought about ideas of how we could, together in Norfolk, consolidate all the current groups that we've got working together. Because there's the dragons, I've just heard about the real group, guinea pigs. We've got lots of different pockets of groups, but not everyone knows about them. So what we were thinking is to get a directory together potentially to put all the different groups, their ages within there, so that people who are beginning a new project, a new service, or developing or improving can go along to that directory and look at the different groups who would be able to support and work together with the co-production right from the start. People agreed in my group that we are doing co-production to some extent, but the participation of the children and young people is the most challenging part, because it's getting the cohorts together to participate. So that was really the main area we looked at. Hopefully that makes sense. Did anyone want to add anything out of my group that I may have missed?
I'm just aware that it's 1 minute past 12 and I do like to try and be timely. So I'm going to apologise to the other groups, including mine, that we're not going to hear from everybody. But we've picked up on some similar themes. I mean, I think we've had positive feedback about particularly hearing from a young person like Amy, who's made us all reflect on what co-production really is, and the way that we can listen better and the group I work with certainly talked about truly listening, respect and honesty. I've got a bit of a homework task for you, and I think it might pick up on the audit, the directory. I've put your co-production pledges into a grid. What needs to be in place for co-production to happen is one of your pledge areas. What does this mean in practice? And I've added 2 new columns. What action do we or I need to take to enable this? Is already working well. And it would be great, because we next meet on the 20th. If we got, even if you just completed a line or 2 about what you know your area, that would just help us to come back to start to get a bit more practical, because the vision, a bit like Gandhi said when he came to England, he was stopped by a Cathay Pacific news reporter, and he said, "Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization?" And he said, "I think it would be a good thing." Everyone, which I think is brilliant, everyone thinks co-production is a good thing. It's the starting to make it happen, and the making it happen routinely at the individual, the service and the strategic level. So our next challenge is, we seem to have the values and the principles in common. Let's have a look at the how we do it now, and how we could do it even more powerfully, given this incredible group of people who've given their time today and are going to come back on the 20th between 10 and 12 again. And we'll have a bit more group work then, and hopefully some examples of the way that we can move things forward. Does that sound okay? Oh, you get lots of smiles. You're such a lovely group. I wish we were together in person, but let's continue our work on the 20th. And if you've got any other ideas or feedback, I know that Tracy and Family Voice and Amy for sending us would be really grateful, like I would, to hear that from you. So have a good rest of day, and thank you for your contribution, participation and your co-production today.